This happened about 10 years ago, during the 4th of July weekend. My family owns a little beach shack-style seafood restaurant that of course I worked at all through high school and every summer when I came back from college. Our restaurant is actually located at the beach, like we have a back deck that you can walk down onto the beach. During the 4th, it's always insanely busy from all of the people coming down to watch the fireworks. That night, we were slammed, but things started to wind down around 9 p.m. By 11, most of the customers had left, and I was getting ready to close up. I let the other wait staff leave, so it was just me and our dishwasher left in the building. I was wiping down tables and doing the usual closing routines when I noticed a guy sitting at one of the back tables. I hadn't seen him come in, which was odd because by this time I thought everyone had cleared out. He looked rough, like he hadn't slept or showered in days, and he was staring down at his hands on the table. I walked over, trying to be polite but also wanting to get home. I told him we were closing up and asked him if he needed anything else. He looked up at me with bloodshot eyes and muttered something I couldn't quite make out. It sounded like he said he was waiting for someone. I told him he'd have to wait outside because we were definitely closing up. He didn't move. Just sat there, staring at me. Suddenly, the guy stood up. I was startled and stumbled back a few feet. He yelled at me that he was waiting for his friend and he couldn't leave. I kept looking toward the kitchen door, hoping our dishwasher would call the cops or something. The guy followed my eyes and maybe sensing what I was thinking, he started to head toward the kitchen. I grabbed his arm and told him he couldn't go back there. He turned around, and there was this look in his eyes that sent chills down my spine. He pulled out a small knife from his pocket and pointed it at me. I told him that was fine and he could wait for his friend for as long as he needed. He slowly sat back down but kept his hand over his knife on the table. My heart was pounding. I tried to stay calm and the first thing I could think of was to offer him some food on the house while he waited. He nodded his head that he'd take the food, so I backed into the kitchen. I saw the back door was open and our dishwasher was outside taking a smoke break. I didn't want to chance that guy in the dining room going berserk or anything, so I just quickly grabbed a couple of sandwiches and a soda. When I came back out, the guy was pacing near the counter. I handed him the food, trying to keep my distance. He took it, but he didn't leave. He just stood there, eating like he hadn't had a meal in days. Finally, he finished eating, shoved the knife back in his pocket, and without a word, walked out the door. I locked it behind him and watched as he disappeared into the night. I didn't even realize I was shaking until our dishwasher came in and asked if I was ready to go. He had no idea what had just happened and felt terrible about it. Because the guy had a knife and seemed out of it, I called the cops, but by the time they got there, the guy was long gone. They took my statement and said they'd keep an eye out, but I never heard anything more about it. For months after, I was jumpy every time I closed up, double-checking the locks and looking over my shoulder. It's a reminder that even in a small, familiar town, you can never be too careful. This happened to me when I was about 9 years old, during the 4th of July weekend in the mid-80s. Every year my family would go to this big park to watch the fireworks show. It was a huge event with food stalls, games, and a carnival atmosphere. My parents would set up a picnic blanket, and my little brother and I would run around and play until the fireworks started when it got dark. We'd check in with our parents every now and then, but for the most part we'd stay gone, just playing. This was obviously a totally different time back then. That year, the park was packed. I feel like it was more so than usual. My parents were busy chatting with some friends, and my brother and I were playing tag with some other kids we had just met. At one point, I lost sight of my brother and the other kids. But I wasn't too worried at first because the park was familiar, and I figured I'd find them soon enough. As I was wandering around looking for them, a man approached me. He was probably in his late 30s, wearing a baseball cap and sunglasses. He smiled and said he had seen my brother and could help me find him. Now, I know this is like the classic stranger danger scenario, but at that age, I hadn't really internalized the lessons about not talking to strangers. I had been to that park for the 4th many times before, and I just felt safe there, so of course I thought some strange man was going to help me find my brother. I followed him, thinking he was just a nice guy trying to help. We walked for a few minutes, and he kept making small talk, asking me questions about my family and school. But it started to feel weird when he led me away from the crowded areas of the park. I remember looking around and realizing I didn't recognize where we were anymore. He then suggested we check near the parking lot, and something about that just made my stomach twist. I stopped walking and said I wanted to go back to my parents. His smile faded a bit, and he told me not to worry, that it would only take a minute. When I insisted, he grabbed my arm. It wasn't hard, but it was firm enough that I couldn't just pull away easily. Panic set in, and I did the only thing I could think of. I screamed as loud as I could. Immediately, people nearby turned to look, and the man let go of my arm, muttering something under his breath before quickly walking away. A woman who had been selling ice cream nearby came over and asked if I was okay. I was crying and could barely get the words out, but I told her what happened. She stayed with me and called for security. They managed to find my parents, who had no idea what was going on or that I was missing. The police were called, and I gave a description of the man, but as far as I know, they never found him. Looking back, I realize how lucky I was. That moment could have turned out very differently if I hadn't screamed or if there hadn't been people around to help. It's a memory that still gives me chills, especially every 4th of July when I see families out with their kids, enjoying the same kind of event. It reminds me to always be cautious and to never underestimate the importance of teaching kids about safety around strangers. Alright, so this happened to me when I was about 16, back in the summer of '76. It was the 4th of July weekend, and my friends and I decided to camp out in the woods near our hometown. This wasn't some deep, dark forest. It was more like a big patch of trees with a small clearing where we could set up tents and a campfire. Perfect spot for some teenage mischief. There was 5 of us, me, Tommy, Bob, Lisa, and Pam. Tommy came from a huge family, and he'd bring this giant tent his family used whenever they went camping. So we always slept in one tent back then. We spent the first night just hanging out, roasting marshmallows, and telling dumb ghost stories. Nothing too crazy. Around midnight, we called it a night and went to bed. Sometime in the middle of the night, I woke up to the sound of branches snapping nearby. At first, I thought it was one of the guys playing a prank, but when I peeked out of the tent, I saw something that made my blood run cold. There was a man standing just outside our camp, half hidden in the shadows. He was tall, scruffy looking, and just staring at our campsite. I tried to convince myself it was just some harmless hiker or maybe someone from town who'd had a bit too much to drink. But then he started moving closer, and I could see the glint of something shiny in his hand. It looked like a knife. I quickly woke up Tommy and whispered what I'd seen. He told me to stay quiet and keep an eye on the guy while he woke up the others. We all huddled together in the tent, whispering about what to do. Bob suggested making a run for it, but Lisa pointed out that we'd have to leave most of our stuff behind, and who knew how fast this guy could move. We decided the smartest thing would be to stay put and hope he'd just go away. Tommy had a small pocket knife, but that was it. We figured if the guy did try and come at our tent, we could at least overpower him or something because there were more of us than him. We kept as silent as possible, barely even breathing, as we listened to the man pacing around our camp. Every now and then, he'd stop, and it felt like he was right outside the tent, listening for any sound. This went on for what felt like hours, though it was probably just 20 minutes or so. Finally, we heard him walk off into the woods. We stayed quiet for a long time after that, not daring to move or speak. As dawn broke, we finally felt safe enough to come out. We packed up as quickly as we could and got the hell out of there. When we got back to town, we told our parents and the cops what had happened. They took us seriously enough, but as far as I know, they never found the guy. To this day, I have no idea who he was or what he wanted. Maybe he was just some drifter looking to scare some kids, or maybe it was something worse. Either way, I've never gone camping again without some serious protection, and the 4th of July always brings back that chilling memory.